What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by Ian Culbard. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing well. So we're going to talk about your book, Salamandre, and so much else, and how I butchered the spelling and pronunciation of the book, and all that jazz. But before we go, I always like to ask when I bring a creator on, how did you get into creating comics?
Well, I started out back in the day when I was at university and stuff. We didn't really have comics courses. I don't think we did. If we did, I
Okay.
would have been on it, but we didn't have stuff like that. And I'd grown up not just comics, but I also loved film.
Mm.
And so I studied illustration, but then there was like a side course that went off into animation.
Mm.
And I ended up, and I figured, well, storyboards is close enough because I've always wanted to draw comics since I was a kid. And so I did film and TV, and then I ended up being a film and TV director, working for a production company in London. I started out Passion Pictures, and I became a director at Picasso Pictures and made TV commercials and stuff. And I wrote for television development stuff. So nothing probably. There are some things that I've written that did get out there, but they're short little interstitial things that I did for Nickelodeon and people like that.
Okay.
But the main thing is that I started developing TV shows for things like Aardman, Disney, people like that. But development hell teaches you that stuff just doesn't get out there to the public. And
Right.
so I made my own comic, which I printed 10 copies of and sold in Gosh in London. And weirdly, we ended up and it sold to 10 people. That's all the people that bought it. And a couple of years later, I was crewing up for writing on a TV show. So I had a writer's room to crew up on. I needed a bunch of writers. And one of them happened to be Ian Carney, wrote comics back in the day. He wrote a comic with Woodrow Phoenix called Sugar Buzz. And he ended up coming to the job. And he said, "This show that you're doing looks really familiar to this comic I read." And he happened to have read the comic that I wrote. This is a guy from like Liverpool, like
So
miles away.
literally one one out of 10.
The 1 out of 10 people happens to come and work in the writers' room for the BBC for us. So then I was reading his stuff, obviously, and then I was just thinking, oh man, I could really need to be able to do this. And then and things in film and TV were going really good, and then I think my son was born. My eldest son was born, and I remember now is the worst possible time to change careers, so I'm going to do it now.
Right? Why not? Right?
Yeah. Like the most irresponsible thing I could do right now is change careers. So I did, but it's a good motivator. Having your kids there is definitely a good motivator. So I stuck with it, and within a short space of time, things were working. I managed to get. I started off with doing a new recruits program for Dark Horse, and that's where I kind of got a break. And then, well, that is where I got a break. And tried out for 2000 AD and got a really nice rejection letter the day that my son was born. And
Oh wow.
so I didn't care, because I was really
Right.
elated. I remember reading this rejection letter going, that's really nice. Because I was really loved up because my son had just been born. And then I worked on, and then that led to working for Self-Made Hero. And I did loads of graphic novels for Self-Made Hero because I did with I.N.J, and I did Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. That was my first book.
Okay.
That was like a 122-page book, and it was loads of dialogue, and so it was a real baptism of fire, that book. But I loved it, absolutely loved it. And then when we'd done with that, we did a bunch of Holmes books, Sherlock Holmes books.
Oh yeah.
And then I asked one day, because he was going off to do Jane Eyre or something like that, and I said, can I do Lost World? I was asking the editor, because that's kind of drawing dinosaurs and stuff.
Yeah.
People on an expedition. They said no, and I went, oh crap. And so I looked at the bookshelf and I saw Mountains of Madness, and I said, oh, I could do Mountains of Madness, because that's just it. I just thought, well, that's set in snow, so that's going to be really drawn. And then Emma Haley was the editor, the boss at Self My Hero, she said, yeah, we happen to be developing a short story thing with Lovecraft stuff. Why don't you do a graphic novel that goes alongside that? So, and then I ended up doing 4 graphic novels because that sold really well. And then, yeah, and I did King in Yellow, so a bit of deviation from Lovecraft to that. And then, and then Mountains of Madness came out. I'm giving you my entire career.
I love it. I love it. That's what I want. I want to hear it all.
But it is a change. So, and then basically Dan Abnett saw that my name was I.N.J. Culbard, and he said he thought that 4 people had put together Mountains of Madness. He didn't realize it was one guy. And it was something like that. That's how the legend goes. And basically, so he got in touch, and we worked with Karen Berger at Vertigo at the time, and we worked on a series called New Dead Wardians, and working with him was amazing, and really fired off at each other, and you know, it was really good. And so and then that kind of spiraled into working for 2000 AD on a series called Brink, which we're still doing to this day. We're on book 6, and also working on Wild's End, which was a series we did for Boom, and we've done loads of stuff. I've forgotten what we've actually done now. we did a series for Dark Horse called Dark Ages, and yeah, and so it kind of went like that. And then Karen got in touch in 2018, saying she wanted to pick me up to do a book with Christopher Cantwell. I said yes before I'd even seen the thing. I was like, yeah, like, whatever it is.
Why not?
And it was really good, luckily. That was amazing. And that experience was fantastic. And that kind of, everything there is just leading into what essentially became Salamandre.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we got to now. I've missed loads of bits, but yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I mean, that's why I like to ask, because I can always I can rattle off like things when I've read, you know, like when I'm doing research, I'm like,
that
doesn't do it justice.
This interview, I probably brought the interview totally to the end now because we covered everything.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
That's it. Okay, toodles, good.
So we get to this book that you have that you've been working with I believe with Berger Books and Dark Horse, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's right. Yep. Imprint of Dark Horse. That's right. Yeah.
So where did, you know, first off, I guess before we get into where this idea came about, what if someone hasn't gotten a chance to read it yet, what's the premise of this book?
So the premise of this book is you have a young boy who loses his father and then essentially loses his inspiration to essentially draw comics for himself. Yeah. And then he's sent to spend the summer with his grandfather in a country. It's sort of an analog of our history, East-West Berlin type thing. He's sent over to, during the Cold War. So he's sent over to this other side to spend the summer with his grandfather. But he's in a country where it's a very totalitarian regime of no art whatsoever, unless it's, political art for the emperor stuff, and it's no even flowers are contraband, and you can't have birthday parties because you're only supposed to honor the emperor and so on. So it's a very heavy exaggeration of what Eastern Europe was like, because there were things that were contraband, but not to that degree. So it was crazy, but it was to show a very stark difference between two places, one that's like a very sort of high cultural movement area, and then go into an area where it's completely devoid of that, or it's moving away from that and covering history and getting rid of people thinking much more openly and stuff. So and of course that's his he goes into a world where it's very oppressed, and it's about his experiences there and his journey basically.
And it's a powerful journey, and the young protagonist that we follow along, I remember reading this and I was just going like, you punch us in the gut right off the bat. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
And
I think
it's the storytelling, it's really so unique, because it's not something that I had typically read when I you get
Yeah.
sent graphic novels and things, to talk about for interviews and things. This is not a world that I've ever really gotten to dig into more. So I was really
Mm.
captivated by the uniqueness of the story.
Yeah. I think it's like one of the things about this was when I was pitching it, um, I'd been pitching loads. Like, so when I was asked to come up with, like, what would I come up with if I did a graphic novel on my own? So I did quite a few pitches, and every single one of them fell apart. It was just getting knocked down, knocked down, knocked down. And I was trying to figure out how to be able to get something across, and because I've worked in TV and done pitching there and stuff like that, so I'm used to that entire process, and I'm really used to because you get a lot of people to pitch and they will have one idea. The trick is to not have one idea. The trick is to have a lot of ideas, but understand that the ideas themselves, at their core, can be very kind of might have been done before, or
Right.
they're very simple and straightforward at the beginning, but it's what you do with the idea that's the important part of it. And I think that editors generally, is probably the same in film and TV, is they're looking for things that are familiar but unique.
Right.
It sounds almost like the complete opposites of each other, but they're not. What it is the familiar is the thing that you can market, you can sell it to people.
Right.
Because they go, oh yeah, I kind of know what the Cold War was, for example. Right. But unique is, that's my story, because that's, I did grow up with I took experiences that I had. And I think at the same time, you have an audience equally that slots into this, that knows what it wants, but has no idea what it needs. So you effectively have a group of people who go, I kind of want this right now, but you want to give them something that they need. And the need comes from the unique thing that you have. And so you've got to be able to sell that in that way. So I went away when I failed. Like, there was one point where I got pitched through and I was developing it, and it totally fell apart in the breakdown of the story. Like, it really crumbled right there. It's just like, when it's gone.
Yeah.
And like, so we talked about it, and then let's try something else in the future. And I thought, I've blown it. I've totally blown this deal. So I rang my older sister up, my big sister, and I said, because she's a writer, and I said, okay, how do I write from the heart? I've got to really gut punch this one. Like, how do I do that? And she said, all right, well, as an exercise, just take a situation from your childhood that was very dramatic. Yeah. Use that as your finale, and then work backwards from there. So I took a moment. The finale in the book, actually, I had to talk about it without talking about it, but there's something that happens at the end of the book, and the conditions of what happened totally happened.
Okay.
And when I was going over the idea, I was trying to figure out what was the responsible adult in the room thinking at the time, like, in terms of what actually happens in the story. And then I figured that out, like, going backwards through our family history and stuff, because what my family were actually doing at the time and all that kind of stuff. And I worked really trying not to talk about that finale, and then worked backwards from there towards the front end of the book, and then and figured out everything that slid into place. And then I sat down, and within 24 hours, I'd written not the whole script, but an outline that was like a proper full outline, something that usually takes about a week or so, and or months even. But I got it, and I sat down and looked at it, and I knew it was it. Like, I could tell that this was going to work, but that bit where you're like, you second guess yourself. I was way too confident that this was going to be okay, and I just never normally get that. And I think it's because normally when you come up with an idea, you worry that somebody else has done it before, or this. I had none of that at all, like, because I knew this was unique, because it was coming straight from me.
Yeah.
So I sent it off, and I thought, if this doesn't work, like, this is nuts. And it immediately got the deal. That was it. The second she got it, she wrote back and she said, this is it, basically. And then we hammered out the story, editorial discussions, and I mean, originally I had loads of dinner parties in it. They all left and stuff like that. So there was a lot of structural shaking out. One that was done, but just the regular stuff that you would get script writing, basically.
Well,
There it was go.
that's
It's
all.
great.
That's awesome to hear, because I was going to ask, originally how the idea kind of came about. And, you said you pulled from, childhood a little bit and some of your
Yeah.
experiences. And, and I was thinking about that because early in the story, our young protagonist is writing comic books, right? Like he's drawing comic books. And you talked about that was something that, you did
I did that from an early age.
And
see,
so
I was raised bilingually, speaking 2 different languages. And I had a real problem with English for some reason. And probably because Polish technically is my first language, because it's my mother's language. So you're going to speak what your mom says, So, and I can remember just at school, like things like reading and stuff like that. So my mom encouraged comic book reading from an early age. So, and it really, and I also didn't used to write essays. Like, so when they get you to write about the Battle of Hastings at school, I would draw it, even though it's a tapestry actually, but I drew the whole thing, and I would draw everything and hand it into my teacher as comics.
Yeah,
because I just found it easier to kind of communicate that way. And so that bug was from a very early age. I used to read loads of stuff.
So how is the process for you as someone who, because you don't have it often, of someone who is the writer and the artist of the project. So what is that process for you of figuring out as you're writing to then how you're going to go about drawing it? And
I think when I started out, because I started out doing 120-page books, the first thing I used to do was I'd break things down so they were easier. So I used to work in double-page spreads, so that it wasn't 120, it was 60. It's things like that where you kind of mentally break it down so that you're better prepared and you don't panic, because it can seem overwhelming when you do a book. But one of the things I learned from that process, because I took advice from people who had bomb disposal experts, there's this 3-point thing where you deal with, you don't rabbit hole, you don't what if, you don't you do one thing at a time. And that one thing at a time thing, from disposing of a bomb, like, I know that sounds a bit weird, but it's to deal with like the stress of the work and stuff. But the one step at a time thing just means that you just deal with each process as it comes up. And so I even do that when I'm drawing a page. So I'll draw characters, then I'll draw backgrounds, and then I finish up. So it's all just bit by bit by bit. But the thing with the writing is, then what I do is I write full scripts first. So I don't even think about how it looks. I just think about, I just I write it as if it's going to be a scene, as if it was in a movie or something. It doesn't matter. I don't really think about what the style is going to be or any of that. I wait until I've actually locked it down as a script, and then I hand it over, and it goes for editorial, and then comes back, and then essentially it's a go for the art. And then I take a breather for a second, and then I come to it as an artist, completely fresh to this, because that's a secondary set of skills. That's like the other part of a normal collaboration, and I read it like an artist would. So I'm usually like sitting there going, what the hell is this writer thinking? So I did thinking, why the hell did I think I was going to be able to draw that?
And so now you're the artist going, what the heck is this writer thinking? Like, and you're like, oh wait, that's me. Shoot.
I spend the whole time as an artist just complaining about the writers. And then I get through to the end. So it's kind of, it's no different to if I was working with Dan or with anybody else, really. So it's that sort of, that part of the process. It's mainly because, for example, when I'm working with Dan, it's like he'll be very minimal on stage directions. They're in there, but he doesn't tell you how to lay out a scene specific. Sometimes he does, it depends. And because sometimes often it will change, the layout will change. Usually because I use a lot of theatrical staging when I'm doing stuff, because I always think that characters need to be in certain positions that kind of tell its own story, like you would in theater. All right. So I do a hell of a lot of that when I'm actually doing it. So I think it's because a lot of the scripts I get are usually very talky scripts. And so I do action, but I end up doing a lot of acting
Yeah.
instead. So it's like it's one or the other really. So I kind of end up doing that. But that means that you're kind of telling a story in a very on an emotional level anyway, often. And you're digging for things that might not be there in the words, but you want to put across because you're showing, not telling. So, it's that sort of thing. And so as a writer coming to my own scripts, I know that I'll just pick that up.
Yeah.
I don't need to go into any kind of a deep dive on what the location looks like and stuff, because I know that the artists will be fine with that. It's okay. So they are full scripts though. I mean, if I had to, I could easily hand it over to another artist and they'd be able to get on with it. Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about the dialogue because, like you said, there is action in your story, but it is a lot of driven of the character relations and the suspense between, the dynamic between the characters that you've developed, and you develop them in a very short amount of time, very quickly and very well done. So
thank you. I always think that like a conversation around a coffee table should be as exciting as a car chase. Really, I think it shouldn't be that like that when you've got things like suspense and stuff coming up in a scene, whether they're in a car or they're actually talking about something.
Yeah,
you can build that dramatic impetus up quite a bit. So and it has purpose beyond a bit more purpose than a car chase, really.
Yeah. I dig that for sure. So as someone
do loads of that.
Yeah, for sure. So as someone who, you write and you also draw, is there one of the art forms that you gravitate towards more when it comes to comics or you're just like, it depends on the project? Or
in terms of which one do I prefer?
Yeah, like which one do you prefer? Like, is there one that you prefer if you're like, this is my wheelhouse that I feel I enjoy the most?
Honestly, it's because of the fact that like when you're writing, one of the bits I really love is the bit where you're making the story click together. But you can be doing that any part of the process. So when you're sitting there mapping out the story, I love the bits where it's like a jigsaw puzzle and it's like, oh, that goes here. That's the scene that's going to go there. I love that. That's amazing because you have like a murder wall.
Yeah,
and you're just pinning up what's going to go next and stuff like that. I love. But then what I also love is when you're working on a dialogue, the bit of the dialogue that has a callback in it or something, and you suddenly realize, oh, that's going to be, so that it never kind of ends really.
Right.
But when you're then drawing it, you similarly hit those same sorts of things that you go, oh, and then I can show this. And it's kind of, I love that whole part of the process because you're learning from yourself in a way. You're kind of learning from your subconscious about what it is that you really want to say.
Yeah.
Like, and it comes out in the stuff that you're doing. And I like that enormously. So there's not really, it's a challenge to say to somebody, which is your favorite bit.
Yeah.
I think if I was really honest, it'd probably be the murder wall at the beginning when you're sitting there.
The whole process of doing it.
Yeah, completely. That bit's really satisfying. And it's physical as well. It has to be on. I have
so this isn't a metaphorical murder. Like you actually have
I do, yeah. They're boards and they're post-it notes, then I just like stick them up. But they have to be, because originally I was doing it in I have to physically move the stuff around for some reason. So I have to it has to go on a post-it note so I can rip it off and just like tear it up and do the next bit. But when you put everything, I can't do that bit where you just do it in a Word document because it's like copy and paste and move things. I couldn't do that. I have to kind of have it locked down visually. I have to be really tactile with it, move it about. And then once I know that's there, okay, then it goes in the Word document. I'll type that up. That's fine. So it is a physical process, really.
That's so cool to see, like, to hear that it actually is a physical process. Like,
it does. I work in 5 acts, so each board is act. But that means you can also just chuck an act up and go, okay, we're going to start with act 4
and get a new board up, and
you can move everything around that way. So it's quite cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I like to ask that question because it's always interesting to see if there is something that sides, and it also is sometimes you're just making someone choose between their children, like the two things that they love the most, because you love and you're talented at both. Like that's be able to I've dealt with enough interviews with creators to know the process of writing comics and drawing
Yeah.
comics, and to be able to do both. That's got to be. Is there ever? I mean, I obviously I know you have collaborators with the people else,
Yeah.
outside this book, but I feel like a lot of the collaboration in a comic comes between the artists and the writers. So, do you miss that sometimes when it's just you doing the two, or do you get enough of
I
the
mean,
collaboration from the other parts of the teams?
I get you're working with an editor, and
Yeah.
that's who you're bouncing off at that point. Really, I think when I'm working with Dan, for example, we break stories together. So
Okay.
that's the bit where we that is like a writer's room. There's two people coming in and they'll just chuck whatever they've got at that murder wall, technically. And we will do that for hours. We call them omelette sessions because it's all about breaking as many eggs as you can to get in there. And the other thing about that process is what's brilliant about, and this is I figured out a different way of doing this, but it's about when you're at loggerheads with the person you're collaborating with. Say, for example, he's got this amazing idea and he can't let it go. I've got this amazing idea and it'll change the story this way, and I can't let it go. What we do is we go, we're both wrong. There's a third option neither of us has considered, but it's just in our periphery. We can't see it because we're too busy looking at this. What is it that we're missing? We both are able to recognize that, and I think that's one of the strongest parts of how we collaborate, because we both recognize when we're at lock horns, and then we just go, hang on. Right? What are we not seeing right now? So and whatever the thing is, it's always the one that we do. Like when we both look at it, we go, it's this, and we just go, yeah, and it goes that way. And part of the reason it goes that way is because we could never have arrived at that if it hadn't been for locking horns in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being this, that kind of very dynamic way of working. But I think it's when working on my own that way, at the beginning, there used to be like the second guessing thing where you're like, is it a good idea? Can I go? But then I just do the equivalent of that thing. When you're making a decision, you flip a coin and then you end up going, oh, I really wish it had been heads. That's you listening to your inside voice going, no, it should have been, because you do know the answer. You definitely know the answer. But you've got to, it's your doubt that's making you think, is it the other thing? And so I kind of do a version of that. But I do try a lot of options. It is harder doing it on your own though, because when you're breaking a story with someone else, it's just you're able to see that third way a lot clearer if you're both willing to do that, because that's all about killing each other's darlings. So that's something that comes up quite a bit.
Where can people find this book? Hopefully if they're listening or watching this interview, they're captivated by it now already, because I've enjoyed this so much. But where can people find the book?
Right now it's in comic stores, and it was caught up with a lot of books that were delayed on shipping there at this time of year. But it is in bookstores. It's properly in bookstores from just before Christmas. I think it's the 22nd.
Yep.
So it will be in all other bookshops, because the way the comic store, I think comic market and the book market is slightly different. So one will get ahead of the other one. So yeah, it is in comic stores right now, but you can get it in bookstores broadly from the 22nd onwards. Nice. Yeah. Well,
this has just been a delight talking to you about comics and the process of how comics are made. It is, I love just peeling back the layers and just, getting to see the behind the scenes a little bit.
Yeah. That's cool.
So, well, Ian, where can people follow along with you to, keep up with what you're creating in?
Oh gosh, I'm one of those people, weirdly, it doesn't have a, I don't know if it's weirdly.
No.
I don't have a website. That used to be a real thing, didn't it? Everybody had a website, but I never cottoned on to that. But the other one was, I have an Instagram that semi-active, and I have a Twitter account which is there for as long as Twitter is.
So which at this stage you never know.
We just don't know. So it could still be there in a week's time. I don't know. But I'm on Twitter, or I'm mostly, I'm also not one of these people that posts a lot of art. But I do try to.
Yeah.
I do make a concerted effort. I mostly retweet. I'm a retweeter.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, again, it has been a delight to get to sit down and talk with you about comics. Gang, I highly recommend checking out this book, Salamandre. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think it's something that you will too. So make sure you, if you're listening or watching, check the description of the video how to follow along with Ian with what is going on and how you can pick up this book. So
thank you very much.
yeah, with that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.
Thank you.